Welcome to Midlife Customs at Craig's Garage. In this video, I set up the gears for my new Ford 9-inch rear end. If you like working on cars and watching DIY videos, then you should hit the subscribe button because that is what I post on this channel. Please take a quick minute to read this disclaimer. I am not a professional, nor do I claim to be. I start off by removing the pinion assembly so I can work on the carrier bearing preload. There is a specialty tool you can use to work on the adjusters, but I didn't have it, so I used this. I will put a link in the description below for the proper tool. Next thing that I did was I wanted to line up one of the holes with the bolt. After aligning the bolt with the hole on the adjuster, I will only turn it to where it turns one circle and lines back up at a time. With the pinion assembly still out and the adjusters lined up with the bolts, I will now tighten the bearing caps to 40 foot-pounds, which is half of the recommended setting. As you can see here, the ring gear is spinning quite freely. So what I'm going to do is set something called bearing preload by tightening the adjuster until there's some kind of resistance on it. And I believe it's called lash, and you're trying to set it to 0 lash. But this was the first time I've ever done it. And I watched this awesome series called Card Tapes, and I recommend that you watch that. But it just shows that, you want to put it to where it's barely spinning and you have some resistance on it. The next thing I did was put the pinion assembly back in so that I could set up the backlash. And I'm basically just going to put that in to where it's snug, but I'm not going to torque it down. So what I'll be doing here is moving the ring, and I'll be doing that by working with the adjusters. And like I said before, every time I do one thing, I'm going to do the opposite. So if I loosen one side, I'll go to the other side and tighten that the same amount. And here's a visual on how that works. So if you loosen the main cap on the pinion side and tighten the other one, it's going to bring the ring closer to the pinion. So if you do the opposite and you loosen the one away from the pinion and tighten the cap by the pinion, it's going to take it further away from the pinion. And once again, I'm always going to try to line up the bolt with the hole and only turn one circle at a time, and the exact opposite of what I'm doing on the other side. So I got myself a dial indicator with a magnetic base. These things are awesome. I just don't see how you can do it without them. You just flip the switch and the magnet goes on and holds the base of it in place. After you have the base of it set, then you can put the indicator to where the little plunger sits on one of the teeth on the rings. After getting it nice and flat, you can just twist the knob on the handle and that'll lock it in place. Then I just double checked that it wasn't going to slip off or anything while I moved it. After I was happy with all the positioning, I just turned the case on the dial to zero it out. They recommend that you set your backlash on new gears to about 7 thousandths to 10 thousandths, and on the used gears you should aim for about the 10 thousandths mark. And as you see here, mine was going over just a little bit, which means I have to bring the gear a little bit closer to the pinion. And once again, I just turn it the exact amount on both sides, and I got lucky to where I only had to turn it one position and then do the exact on the opposite side. and it put me right at where I thought it should be. And as you can see here, it was going right between about 8 and 9 thousandths, which for my first time I thought would be great. So I just left it there. Another thing that can be done with this dial indicator is checking a thing called runout. And that's just set up the same way, just on the side of the ring instead of on the tooth. After double and triple checking everything, once I was happy with it, I torqued down the main bearing cap bolts to 80 foot-pounds. I installed temporarily the adjuster nut clips so that I can set everything up and not have to worry about anything moving. It's on there pretty tight, but just as a precaution. And at the end, I'll take them back off and put some Loctite before I put them in permanently. Now that I felt pretty confident that I had everything adjusted and where it should be, I was going to put the little marker stuff on several teeth so that I can put some pressure on the ring and check the pattern. Once I had several teeth marked, I just put some pressure on the back. They say you should go both ways, forward and back, while you have a little bit of pressure on it to transfer, have a good transfer on the teeth, and that way you can look at the pattern and see how it goes. And the booklet actually comes with a little diagram that shows like a bunch of patterns, and you can kind of compare it to it and see what it should look like and go from there. When I checked my pattern, I thought it looked like it was making pretty good contact. It looked like it was pretty much right in the middle and spread across on both sides. So I was pretty happy with the way it looked, and therefore I left it that way. So one of the last things I needed to do was remove the pinion assembly one last time so that I can install the O-ring. That is done by just sliding the O-ring over the pinion assembly separate, and then I added some white lithium grease around the whole thing to keep it from getting snagged and so that it could slide in without getting crushed or caught up on anything. Then I just lined up the shims with the holes to make sure I had it all straight before I started to put the pinion assembly back in, because it only goes in one way. And the pinion is the same thing, it only goes in one way, and that's why I used the marking tape from earlier so I knew exactly which way it needed to go back in. And when installing the pinion assembly, I'm just gonna start all the bolts and then do like a crisscross tightening to go ahead and draw the pinion assembly in. Once the pinion assembly is all the way drawn in, then I can also go ahead and torque all the bolts with a crisscross pattern once again to 35 foot-pounds. The last thing I needed to do was remove the locking pins on the adjusters so that I can add some Loctite to them and reinstall them, and those get tightened down to 20 foot-pounds. And that will complete the setup on the gears. On my next video, I show how I installed Explorer disc brakes on my 9-inch housing. If you found this video helpful, please hit subscribe and leave a comment. And as always, thanks for watching.